When we think about our vegetable gardens, a lot of these plants actually need to be pollinated. What we're trying to do is attract beneficial bugs and insects and animals like bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and ladybugs so that they can come in and pollinate, but they'll also eat some of the pests like aphids, whiteflies, or spider mites. So in this chapter, I will show you how to make your very own pollinator garden, as well as build a pretty clever hummingbird feeder that will bring in not only hummingbirds, but some other pollinators as well. And then finally, how to build an insect home so that you get all those beneficial bugs to actually stay in the garden. A pollinator garden is one that attracts bees, butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, you name it really, any sort of beneficial insect that's coming in to actually pollinate the garden. So when you're selecting your spot, remember, they like to be in areas with a little bit more sun, so choose a nice sunny area, but let it be a little protected from the wind. I've selected an amazing spot for this pollinator garden. It's very close to the vegetable garden, but it is its own distinct space. There are a few things to keep in mind that makes a good pollinator garden. Number one, I like to keep things that are native to my area. And the insects that are native to my area, of course, are gonna prefer a plant that's also native. You're probably gonna wanna go into a local nursery and ask them, hey, what works well in my area to bring in the pollinators? And don't stress about cramming as many plants in as you can. You really just want the space to feel as full as possible.
For added variety, I always like to take pollinator-specific plants and sprinkle them into my raised beds, my in-ground gardens. You don't have to have a solely pollinator-dedicated garden. You can sprinkle them around your edibles as well.
It's important to take notice that we have a variety of colors. Different colors attract different types of insects. On top of that, the actual shape of the flower itself will determine the type of pollinator that comes in. So a variety is always good. In fact, there we have a monarch right there. Look at this. As you can see, we already have a little friend. That's how quickly these pollinator gardens can make a difference in your space. When planning out your pollinator garden, you'll want to place your smaller plants up front where they have great access to sun, and your larger plants in back so that they don't shade out everything else in the garden. For each plant, you'll dig out a hole slightly larger than the size of the plant you're putting in. And I'm actually going to take just a little bit of compost to get this plant off to a good start and just get it in there. All right, there we go. In goes our yarrow. I think you'll find this is one of the most satisfying plants to grow because it really is absolutely prized by all sorts of beneficial insects. There's a ton of little flowers that almost form a little landing pad, if you will. You're gonna see a lot of hoverflies on this all the time, which is a fly that looks like a bee, but in fact it is a fly. And you'll see them kind of dancing around the top. Man, it's just a beautiful thing. Next, I wanna put in our salvia, our big boy. This guy's gonna be really good for our bees. It throws out these beautiful spire-like flowers, and bees just go absolutely crazy for it. Let's get our milkweed in. My favorite pollinator plant, specifically because it's the only one that a monarch will lay its eggs on. And in fact, right now, I can look very closely and actually see some eggs that a monarch laid. And pretty soon, you'll see some caterpillars here. What will happen is those caterpillars will feast upon the leaves. But what that means for you as a gardener is that your milkweed will start to look eaten. Now, don't stress out. It will grow back, but they can be ravenous. So if you really like monarchs, sometimes it's a good idea to plant more than one of these. This plant here is plumbago, which is beautiful. These periwinkle blue flowers are gonna attract your butterflies, your birds, just an amazing all-around plant. Our last plant going into this pollinator garden is a cool one. It's called lion's tail. When this really fills in, it explodes in color. They have very long, slender openings, which a bee can't get into. But what can is something like a hummingbird. That looks pretty good, I would say. We're gonna water them in so they get nice and established. Pretty soon we're gonna see all sorts of beneficial insects and organisms to pollinate our crops, take care of pests, and overall beautify the space. It's one thing to attract them, and it's another thing to make them feel at home, which is why what I'm gonna do next is show you how to build a very simple insect home to make them stay for good in the garden. Our pollinator garden is all set up and planted, but we wanna make sure that the pollinators we attract actually stay there. What I wanna do next is provide a home. What we have here is a simple box. That's all it is. It's just made from scrap wood. It can be any size, but I prefer to keep my bug homes smaller if possible, no more than about a foot square. And I have some materials, some cardboard rolls, some bamboo stakes, even some leaves from around the house that I'm gonna fill this up with so our insects have a place to live.
It may be strange to non-gardeners that I'm trying to attract bugs to my home, but gardeners know the vital role of bees, ladybugs, and other pollinating or pest controlling insects in the success of their gardens.
And those are the kind of insects that this will attract. Bamboo is a really fantastic ingredient for these insect boxes. It's hollow on the inside, and that's a fantastic natural home for a lot of different types of beneficial insects. Things like a solitary bee. You know, we think of honeybees all the time as the only bee, but there are thousands of species of bees, only a few of which produce honey, but many live on their own. They don't live in a hive, and they need these little reeds or these little holes to nest in. If you don't have bamboo sticks in your yard, you can just pick them up from a big box store or home improvement store, or you can just use anything hollow that bees can nest in. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut these to size. I want it just slightly more shallow than my box. We don't have to be perfect here. Remember, it's a home for insects. They don't really care that much as long as it is close to how they would naturally nest. Next up, we have something very simple that we all have in our yards, and that's just some extra sticks or twigs. The natural pollinators in our area are nesting in whatever's around, and what's around are these sticks, so it makes sense to put these in here. Another thing to think about when you're building an insect home is, again, keeping it very small and focused. There's always the opportunity to put another one in your garden somewhere. Next up, I have a little bit of shredded cardboard. Very simple ingredient, forms a little bit of a tube that some insects will like to nest in. Add that in there. There we go. Finally, I have some leaves I collected from around the property. Whenever you move a pile of leaves around, you always see insects running about looking for cover because this is the perfect way to shelter themselves. So we'll just fill in the top of the box. That's the basics of filling an insect home. What I want to do now is turn it this way. We're going to use a hammer and some nails to put this lid on. What this is going to do is keep it protected from both the elements and predators like birds who want to come in and eat our pollinator bugs. Now we have to drill our entrance holes. So I've just got a really big drill bit. We're going to put a couple holes in here so our beneficials can actually get into the box. Our holes are drilled, our insects can get into their home. We need to just put a stake on the back to support it. All right, we're all set. Let's get it out into the garden. We just have to drive this into the ground, just push it down into the soil. Might have to give it a couple taps with the hammer. It's about a foot or two off the ground, which is a great height for the particular insects we're going for, ladybugs and the like. Now you can put it at different heights and build even different homes if you're trying to attract something else, but I think this will be absolutely perfect here, sandwiched in this pollinator garden. There we have it, a simple insect home built from scrap material, settled in our pollinator garden, and this is one home that you won't mind bugs stopping by. Next, I'm going to show you how to set up probably the simplest hummingbird feeder of all time. One of my favorite pollinators to see in a garden are hummingbirds. Besides their beauty, hummingbirds do a lot for a garden. They come through and pollinate certain types of flowers, but they also keep your aphid, mosquito, and fly population down by eating those insects. What I want to do is show you how to build a very simple hummingbird feeder that doesn't require any construction at all. All you'll need to make this is an empty soy sauce bottle, a mason jar, flexible wire, sugar, and tap water. If you go to the nursery or the garden center, you're going to see bird feeders of all kinds, and hummingbird feeders can get upwards of 40, 50 bucks. Instead of spending that money, just buy a soy sauce bottle, and I'll show you why it works. The design of the bottle is really cool. When you turn it upside down, the pressure of the liquid doesn't allow any to spill out. So if we can suspend this, you have an instant hummingbird feeder. You have two ports for the hummingbird to come in and feed, and then this red cap's a natural attractant. But what we have to do is fill this up with nectar because I might like soy sauce, but hummingbirds certainly don't. So let me show you how to design a simple nectar recipe. Just take an empty mason jar, granulated sugar, just white granulated sugar, nothing more complex than that, and some water out of the tap. You're going to mix this in at a ratio of 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. That's it. Could not be simpler. So I'm using a mason jar just because it's easy to eyeball the ratios here with these little markers on the side. Take a couple spoonfuls of the sugar. There we go. We'll dump in water up to this mark here. Cap it off. Give it a good shake. Hummingbirds' hearts beat 1,200 times per minute, and they actually eat half their body weight in sugar every single day. And getting a little feeder in place, especially while my garden is still growing, is gonna be a great way to supplement them and have them actually come in and do some pollination tasks. We're pretty well mixed in there. Before I pour, what I wanna do is create my wire frame to hang this. We're just using a flexible metal wire that you can pick up from a craft store. We'll make a loop around the base and then just gently bend it up and around. Go just like this. There we go. Snip off the top. That looks great. Now we fill it up with our nectar. There we go. Perfect amount of nectar, nice red cap, no nectar spilling out until the hummingbirds come in. All that's left to do is hang it up, and I have the perfect tree picked out. I'm gonna put it right underneath this branch here. It's best to place your hummingbird feeder under a tree like this one to provide a little shade and protection for the hummingbirds, but also for that nectar water. We don't want it to spoil too quickly, but I'd still recommend changing it every 3 days or so. That'll ensure hummingbirds are still coming through, getting that nice, beautiful nectar and pollinating the rest of your garden. In this chapter, I showed you how to create a beautiful pollinator garden to bring in all those beneficial birds and insects, but also how to build an insect home to get some of those ladybugs to actually stay in the garden, and then finally, a really creative and fun hummingbird feeder to keep hummingbirds buzzing around doing some pollination as well. So with all these tips combined, your garden is going to be buzzing with life and your vegetables will be absolutely exploding with growth. So thanks for watching, and I hope you learned a lot in this chapter.